Hey guys, welcome to the Mom Show. I'm your host, Courtney Doyle, and this is a place I am giving you permission to not have it all together. Welcome back to the show. Today, my guest is Jill Savage, and she is just full of wisdom and encouragement. And I think that the first time I met you, Jill, and I heard your story, I just remember sitting there thinking, man, this is a woman who has incredible faith, an incredible story of redemption, of how God can move in just the most wonderful ways, and how you have taken a hard season, a hard story, and you have said, you know what, Satan doesn't win in this story, God does. And you were so willing to share that for the next generation and whoever is willing to listen. And so that's what I want you to do today. I do know your story, but I want you to share your story with the listeners because I know that it's going to encourage someone who's hearing it the same way it encouraged me.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. And both Mark and I are very open with our story. We both talk individually and together about it because we do think that it is important because it really is God's story and it's really his story of redemption. And yeah, we're now 14 years out from that story, which is crazy. Has it really been 14 years? But ultimately, what happened was so my husband was in pastoral ministry and he was on the staff at a large church for 10 years. And honestly, it was a sweet place for him. He was in his sweet spot. He was children's pastor. He didn't have the weight of the entire church on him.
Mhm.
He just had his little area and it was so sweet for him. But he'd always felt he really wanted to plant a church. And so the second 10 years that we were in full-time church ministry, we church planted it. And we did it in our own community. So we didn't have to move or
Mm.
relocate or anything. But it wasn't a sweet spot for him. It was challenging. Mark is a real tender-hearted guy, and when you're the number one person, you have an
Mhm.
arrow on your back. After Sunday service, all you do is field complaints, and the music was too loud, and the sermon wasn't deep enough, or it was too deep, or it was just constant. And that
Mhm.
just really wore on him. And so we were getting to the end of that 10 years. He was not in a good place emotionally. He was starting to not be in a good place spiritually. And he was like, I need to get out of here. I'm not in a good place. And so he decided to retire from pastoring. He started his own construction company. And we thought that was going to make a difference. And it did, maybe for a couple months. But the reality is, he would have said that his identity wasn't in pastoring, but in reality, it was more in pastoring than what he realized. And so he started to spiral even more emotionally. Not only that, he came from a really, really difficult upbringing, abuse. There was verbal abuse, physical abuse. And that just I think that he had done a lot of work to heal from that, but there were still elements of that he couldn't just shake off.
Mhm.
And so one of those that we now realize and we can look back on was shame.
Mm.
And shame is when you feel like there's something wrong with you.
Yeah.
And so in that 10 years where that was really hard, he was not in his sweet spot. It was only feeding his shame. And because I'm failing. So therefore, there really is something wrong with me. And all of that to say, though, is that he just began to spiral even more. And in 2011, he was in a dark place. And I knew it. I asked that we get back into some counseling because I just thought, this isn't, I don't even know where to start here, but he's not in a good place. We're not in a good place because he's not in a good place.
Yeah.
So we got back into counseling, but in the midst of that, somebody from his past reached out or on Facebook to say, hey, I know you're a pastor. I'm going through a divorce. Would you help me? And most affairs don't start with the intention to have an affair. They
Mhm.
start with just not protecting your heart and not protecting your marriage. And
Mhm.
so he began to engage this person. And of course, it moved from solving her problems to talking about both of their problems. And before you know it, they were having an emotional affair, which within a matter of months became a physical affair. And my world was turned upside down. That is the most difficult thing I've ever been through.
I can.
And I have been through breast cancer and I have been through having a child with some pretty severe mental health issues. And I will say that dealing with betrayal in marriage was the most painful thing I've ever experienced. And I wish I could tell you that I confronted him and he made a U-turn and said, "Okay, you're right, but I made a mistake and I want to do the right thing." That's not what I got.
And how
I
many
got
years, let me pause you there. How many years had y'all been married at this point?
28,
28 years.
28 years. Yeah.
Okay.
5 children, 28 years of marriage, 20 of those in full-time ministry. And I would have said, Courtney, that we had a good marriage. He would have said we didn't.
Interesting.
And this is part of what we also, and we had struggled here and there in different seasons over those 28 years, and
Sure.
we'd go to some counseling for 3 or 4 months and get back on track, or we'd get some mentoring, or we just apply the skills that we'd forgotten to do for a little
Hmm.
while. But in general, nobody had ever helped us to understand a dynamic that was playing out in our marriage that we didn't see then. We only saw it when we began to heal from this.
Mm.
And that dynamic was our attachment styles. An attachment is the relating patterns that you carry into marriage from the home that you grew up in.
Okay.
And so I grew up in a loving home, a loving family, but we didn't do emotion. We were the buck up family. And so I had what's called avoidant attachment. In the avoidant attachment, their number one thing is, hey, everything's fine. We're all
Hmm.
fine. It's all
Yeah.
good. We're fine. And Mark actually had anxious attachment. And what that means is he was constantly looking for people to make him feel good. He
Mm.
was looking for our relationship to make him feel good about himself.
Yeah.
Now, of those with avoidant attachment have the tendency to look to accomplishment to make them feel good about themselves. Those with anxious look to people to make them feel good about
Mm.
themselves. And neither one of those are actually healthy. What we want is secure attachment where we look to Jesus to make
Hmm.
us feel good
Hmm.
about ourselves. And but we didn't know that was going on. So
Yeah.
he's dissatisfied because it's never enough. It's never good enough. I can't make him feel good enough about the relationship and about himself. That's the other thing about anxious attachment is they have this perpetual hole, and it didn't matter what effort I made. It wasn't a
Mm.
good enough. It wasn't enough.
I gotcha.
And so anyway, when I did confront him and said, I just discovered this, he said, "Yep, you're right. I am. I'm having an affair and I'm not stopping." And I thought, who is this man? This is not my husband.
Yeah.
I mean, he was so lost and blind to what was going on. And
How
it
long
was
had it been going on when you discovered it?
when so I discovered it had probably been going on about 6 weeks when I discovered the emotional affair part. So that was first. And he said, "You're right. I shouldn't be talking to her by myself. I'll start looping you into conversations."
Mm.
But the reality is, it went underground. Like
Mm.
and he said, I was committed to that for about a week or two, but he faded into temptation and it went underground. And so then by the time I found out about it being physical, it had been going on in total probably let's see, June to the end of September. So
Okay.
4 months.
Mm.
And so that I was devastated that he was firm in it. And thankfully, I had actually confronted him in the counselor's office. I had found out the night before, I discovered it the night before. And I thought, as hard as that was, because every part of
Yeah.
me wanted to be like, what in the world? But I just thought, no, it's probably better that I do that with the counselor present. And so the counselor actually separated us. And I was a wreck. I was just a wreck. And
Yeah.
I said, I don't even know what to do. And he said, if he is willing to get some help, then I think he could stay. But if he's not willing to get some help, you probably need to ask him to leave. So then when he met with Mark separately, Mark actually was willing to get some help, surprisingly. And so he agreed to go to a conference. It was the Every Man's Battle conference.
Mm.
And at least that was a step in the right direction, but he still was still very harsh and unwilling to. I mean, he recommitted, but it was like very, it was a loose commitment. And honestly, over the next, let me think, 5 months, he went back and forth between the other relationship and recommitting to our marriage 7 times.
Mm.
And then finally, in February of 2012, he left. He moved out and he said, I'm filing for divorce. I'm pursuing the other relationship. I don't love you anymore.
Mm.
And that was very painful because also at that point, Courtney, my kids had to know. My
Yeah, I
kids
was
did,
just about to ask, what age were the kids and how much of this did they know was
they knew.
happening?
So they didn't know anything was happening until their dad moved out. And
Mm.
three of them,
Wow.
and the reason, and there was a reason for that. One reason was that when you're dealing with something like that, your pain is so deep. To
Mm.
add the pain of five more people onto that, really difficult. So I thought
But
I can
how do
only
you
handle my
function,
pain.
Jill?
No,
I'm just thinking about just painful moments that I've had that pale in comparison to what you're explaining. This betrayal by the person you trust the most, the person you've been in relationship with for 28 years. How do you hide something like that?
that's where being that avoider came in handy for
Came
me.
in handy. Okay. Yeah.
I'm not saying it was the healthiest, but I'm just saying that's how I best functioned because I did have a girlfriend that knew. I had two girlfriends that knew. And so I could talk it out with them, I could
Hmm.
process with them. And I I did have some wise people around me some mentors that I could process with, but I just felt like I didn't want my kids to know until we could get to the other side and then they could know it from the redemption story backwards. That
Mm,
was really
yeah. That
like
feels
that's what I was
better.
telling myself.
Yeah.
But age wise, three of them were young adults in their 20s. They were all married, and then two were still at home. They were 15 and 17.
Okay.
Our
So
the
old enough to have understood
Yes, and what I
what
will
was
tell
happening.
you is afterwards, when Mark left and they all had to know, they all said, we've known dad's been off for a while. We just couldn't figure out what was going on.
Mm.
So they knew he was not in a good place. They could sense that he was wrapped up in his own stuff and that he was
Yeah.
distracted and that he was not himself. And so they knew that. And I remember our daughter specifically saying, we all knew dad was off. We just
Mm.
couldn't figure out what was going on.
Were they
So now,
angry that they didn't know sooner?
no, not any of them. No,
Wow.
thankfully. I can see how
Yeah.
some would be, but no, they were all very heartbroken.
I
And
bet.
that was another dynamic that was really interesting, Courtney, because Mark convinced himself that they would understand.
Mm.
He totally convinced himself that they would understand, they would adapt, they would even maybe give him a pat on the back.
Good for
Dad,
you.
it's probably good for you. It's probably time. He did not get that from any of them.
I'm sure.
And so that was a wake up call for him. It was
Uh-huh.
very much a wake up call for him, very silently. Like he didn't obviously talk about that, but he talked about it later being
Mhm.
a part of the unraveling of his what was going on inside of him.
Mhm.
And eventually the other relationship started to unravel. It started to have troubles. It started to have conflict, which by the way was one of the things that so our oldest daughter, Anne, came to me after her dad had left and she said, Mom, I've been Googling how to pray for somebody having an affair. And there's very little information out there. But she said, one thing that I came on is to pray that there would be a hedge of thorns around the relationship. And she said, in other words, that there would be conflict in the relationship. And I said, then let's start praying that. And we began to pray that specifically. And interestingly enough, within about 2 months, there was conflict within that relationship. So we're separated and it is not looking good at all. He is in a dark place. Kids have a lot of boundaries around him. That's waking him up. The two boys at home don't even want to see him. They don't want to do visitations with him even though I made them. Like I said, no, we need to. They did not want to go to his apartment. So I said, all right, can we meet at Dairy Queen or something like that? Because I just felt, no, this is important that they have a relationship with their dad.
Yeah.
So we did do that. But Easter Sunday, 2012, Mark actually, we had a brand new grandbaby and I had gone up to Chicago to be there for the delivery. And so Mark had stayed in our home with our two teenagers. And I had ridden the train up because we were only 2 hours south of Chicago and they lived in the Chicago area. And so I'd ridden the train up. And so I didn't have any transportation. So he brought the boys up to meet this new little one and bring me back. We had spent very little time together, but we did this just for the sake of logistics as well as the
Mhm.
family. And we came back home. It was 2 a.m. Easter Sunday, and he still had another 20-minute drive home. He was tired, and I said, "Why don't you just stay on the couch tonight, and then you can go home when you have a little bit of rest?" And he agreed. And the next morning, our boys got up and actually they got themselves to church because they could. And they were both serving, one on worship team and one was on sound. And so they got themselves to church for Easter and serving and all of that. So it left Mark and I home alone. And so Mark came into the room where I was getting ready for church and he said, "Hey, by the way, I just want you to know I'm filing for divorce this week. And I just want you to be aware of that. He actually had a piece of paper and it had a line drawn down it, the middle, and he said, this is my yard and this is your yard. And this line in the middle is the fence. And we've been meeting at the fence, but I don't want to meet at the fence anymore. And I don't want you in my yard and I don't want to be in yours.
Okay.
And so I just want you to know I'm filing this week. And one of the places the Lord had been really growing me, Courtney, was how I was using my words because I had been careless with my words in the past. And so if God didn't give me words, I didn't say words. And so I was saying a lot less. And so in that moment, I thought, I don't even know how to respond to this. Lord, if you don't give me any words, I don't have any response.
Mhm.
And so I was totally taken back because he actually hadn't been so forthright on divorce until
Mhm.
that moment. And so I said, all of a sudden, the only thought that came in my mind, I think that the Lord gave me these words because they weren't mine, was Mark, Jesus didn't want to go to the cross. In fact, he asked God, don't you have a plan B? Can you
Yeah.
take this cup from me?
Mhm.
But then he surrendered and said, not my will, but yours be done. And that was like, it was like a mic drop moment for Mark. And
Mhm.
he just stood there for a moment and he goes, is today Easter? He had no clue. He was so out of this. And I said, yeah, it is. And what he later told me is that everything was unraveling, and his decision to actually divorce me was that he had just decided he'd made such a mess of things that he was just going to live in ruin. But in that moment, he heard the Lord say, Mark, if you'll trust me for this mess, I'll take care of the rest.
Mm.
And so in that moment, he said, you know what? I'm going to pray that same prayer. And he just quietly said, Lord, I've made a mess of things, but I'm tired of it being my will, my way.
Mm.
It's time for it to be your will, your way. And that was it. And he looked up and he said, could we go to church? And I thought, what in the world just happened?
Yeah. Two
Like,
seconds ago, you're saying, hey, by the way, this is divorce week.
yep,
And now I think we should go to church together.
yes. It was like the blinders fell off in the moment. And I could visually see the surrender that had happened. Like he had been carrying all of this anxiety and anger and all of this in his body. And in that one little prayer, I just saw him like just begin. It's like his body relaxed because he wasn't carrying it anymore. Like he was letting the Lord carry it. And so I'm just like, wow, I don't know what happened. I don't trust what happened, but something just happened. And so I said, sure, of course we can go to church. And so we got ready and we went to church. And as you can imagine, we walked into the church doors and our boys' eyes are as big as baseballs.
Yeah.
And this is
Yeah.
the church that Mark used to lead, and they knew he was not in a good place.
Mm.
And so their eyes are as big as baseballs. Prayers answered because here he walked back in the door. And so we went to church. And at the end of the service, he said, can I spend the afternoon with you and the boys? And I said, sure. And so he did. And by evening, he said, that piece of paper I shared with you that had that line on it, he said, on the other side of that was a list that I have been carrying in my wallet of everything wrong with you.
Mm.
And I have ruminated on that list for years. And he said, I can't even now remember what was on that list. It has no hold over me at all. And I was just like, whoa. Okay, number one, that made a lot of sense because he had a
Mm.
lot of animosity against me that I couldn't put my finger on. And so to find out that he'd been literally making a list of
Right.
everything that he saw was wrong with me. And but that it was like he said, it has I can't even it has no hold on me anymore. It's almost like I can't see that anymore.
Mm.
And
Has he
so
ever explained what drove him to feel that animosity towards you to start the list? Because it sounds like the list
yeah.
started even before the affair started.
Oh yeah. Yes. Definitely it was primarily our differences, and but it was the way that he like perceived our differences. For instance, I'm an internal processor, he's an external processor, and this is something that we teach now to the couples that we work with. We have a little quiz, it's called the personal operating inventory, and these are differences that we did not understand about ourselves, and they were
Hmm.
causing conflict in our marriage, and we want people to understand that. But he misread that because I wouldn't talk about certain things. I must not be thinking about those things, which wasn't true. I'm
Hmm.
just an internal processor. And so it was like the way that I'm wired, I'm a high capacity person. I like to go, I like to get things done. He's a
Yeah.
low capacity person. But my high capacity, because he struggled with that shame, there's something wrong with me.
Mm.
He viewed it that I was better than him. He
It was
was less
threatening to
than me.
him.
It was
Hmm.
threatening. Thank you. That's a good way to put it. It was
Hmm.
threatening to him. It wasn't that I wasn't telling him that, but
Right.
it was the lens he was seeing that through. And then there were one of the things I often say is I did not cause my husband's affair, but I contributed to the dysfunction in our marriage. And so what we're talking about there, what I'm talking about there from a dysfunction in our marriage part is there was a part of me, I'm a strong woman, and there were times I misused my strength. So I could be a little opinionated, or I could be a little controlling, or my way's the right way. And so then, and that did hurt him. And that's one of the things when couples are recovering from infidelity, you often think that the person who broke the trust is the person who had the affair. Yes, that's true. But there are ways that I broke my husband's trust as well. And so usually both parties have broken trust somewhere along the way, and we both have to rebuild trust with each other. So I think all of those kind of dynamics were playing out, and that is how the list ultimately started. These are the things that are, and this is what happens when we ruminate or we grow in resentment, is that we start to shine the flashlight on the bad, or we start to see it in a really narrow way rather than being able to see a broad picture. And so certainly carrying that list around kept the flashlight shining on those.
Yeah, he
So
couldn't see
any
the forest through the trees.
no, you're exactly right. And he kept adding more trees to it. Yeah. We did begin the healing process after that Easter Sunday because he broke off the other relationship, and that was the last time he did completely break that off. He started to begin to become a new person. It's part of the reason we call our ministry Marriage 2.0 Ministries, because he began to become a 2.0 person, and I began to become a 2.0 person. And that eventually helped us to create a 2.0 marriage. It's upgraded, it's better, and much healthier than our 1.0 marriage was. And it took about 18 months, weekly marriage counseling, intentionally us working to rebuild the trust with each other to create that new relationship. But we have a 2.0 relationship. And about 3 years after that, we started to share our story more openly. And about 5 years after that, we actually started to help other couples. And we do that full time now. We love it. It is truly one way that God has taken the broken places and redeemed them for something good.
Yeah, that's just, it's amazing how he's used something so hard and said, I'm going to use this for good and I'm going to help other marriages. I want to back up though. How in this time frame of the infidelity and then the words that are spoken over you, which is, I don't love you anymore. There's things that I just loathe about you. I've got a list. How was that affecting you personally as far as your identity as a woman? What was that doing to you? Because you've explained that Mark was raised in an environment of shame. How was this for you being told that in after being married for so long?
Yeah. Thankfully, I was raised in an environment with a strong sense of who I was in Christ. Jesus was a part of my family growing up. I had a strong sense of who I was in Christ. In general, okay, I'm going to say in general, I stood firm in that. There were moments where I did question and I felt torn down by the things that he was saying. And I can remember one particular time that it was right after Mark left, and I pulled together my pastor. I was leading a nonprofit at the time. And so my board president, my best friend, and two of the leaders in my ministry. And so they became like my little mentoring group during this darkest season. And I pulled them together so that because Mark had left, and I thought, my whole entire ministry is built on authenticity. I am unwilling to pretend that everything's okay. But I felt like I needed to make a public statement, but I needed to do it in a way that protected Mark and wanted him to still come home. So, what we came up with that day is that I would state that Mark had made the decision to leave, to separate, and that I'm heartbroken and our children are heartbroken. But we decided that there would be nothing about the infidelity because we felt like that. We didn't want to uncover that. Our goal was that he would come home. But I
Mm,
also just needed to be authentic about what was going on. I was a blogger at the time. I spent a lot of time blogging about the real life stuff, and I just had to be honest about that.
yeah.
But I remember that was one of those days where I even said to the group, am I as horrible as he says I am?
Mm,
Because if I am, you're going to have to tell me.
yeah.
I
Mm,
need you all to shoot straight with me. And I just, because that was one of those moments where I was just feeling very vulnerable, very torn down, very tired, but
yeah.
honestly questioning myself and
Sure.
going, maybe I am a bitch.
Right.
Honestly, that's what he says.
Yeah.
And so if I am, you really need to tell me this.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
need you to shoot straight with me. And that was a sweet time of ministry with that group of people. They were so reassuring. Jill, you're not perfect, but no, you're not those things. And we
Hmm.
don't see that in you. And I'm sure the Lord will show you the places that you need to grow. And He did. And He does. He continues to, right? Till the day we die. We're not done till we're dead. And so there's always growth to be had. But so, yes, there were moments that it just really broke my heart and made me question myself and my value. But I am grateful that I had enough of a foundation of Christ that I was like, in fact, one of my prayers was I had heard Jennifer Rothschild. She's a Christian musician and author who's blind.
I
And
adore
she had
her.
I love her too. And she had spoken at our Hearts at Home conference. So the nonprofit that I led was called Hearts at Home. And I led it for 24 years. And we did conferences for moms, huge conferences for moms, 6,000 women in attendance. And so Jennifer had been one of our speakers. And probably about 2 years before all of this happened in my life, she had spoken. And I remember she made a statement and she was referring to her blindness, but she said, it is not well with my circumstances, but it is well with my soul. And I just
Mhm.
remember like that stuck with me. Number one, it was just easy to remember, but it stuck with me. And it came back to me during this dark season and it became my prayer. Lord, it is not well with my circumstances, but I am determined that it will be well with my soul. Like I have to stay with my solid foundation on you. Whether my marriage makes it or doesn't make it, it still will be well with my soul
Mm,
because you're the same yesterday, today, and tomorrow. My
right.
marriage might not be the same yesterday, today, and tomorrow, but you're the same yesterday, today, and tomorrow. Help me to keep my eyes on you so it can stay well with my soul, even when
Hmm.
it's not well with my circumstances.
That is an ultimate surrendering posture to say, even though this is not what I want, this does not feel good, this is painful, it reminding ourselves when we begin to believe those lies. And this is lies that we may believe, like in your situation, this was lies from a marriage, a spouse saying, here's the list of things that are wrong with you, which is justifying my behavior. I think if we shifted the conversation over to moms, I think the same thing can happen in a mother child relationship where
Yeah,
a child can keep a tally of, if you would have done this different, I would not have done this, because it's justifying bad behavior from a child by saying you weren't the mother you should have been, or maybe you didn't show up, or you showed up too much, or you punished or you didn't punish, or whatever. Sometimes I think as moms, we make that list on our own. Here are
I
all the
agree
ways
with
that
you.
I have failed as a mom, which then is the reason why child is behaving this way or has turned to a substance or something of that nature. And that is an ultimate surrender posture for us to say, this is your relationship, Lord. This is your child. And how do we get back into a position where we start deciphering truth from lies. Because if we open that door to those lies, we're opening the door for the enemy to say, "You're right.
Yeah.
This is the place I'm going to camp out in all the lies that have been spoken over you or that you are speaking over yourself. And that's where we're going to stay."
And the enemy is the accuser,
Right.
right? And it's not surprising when these lies come, they're usually accusations, and they're
Mm-hmm.
either accusations that, like you said, we do ourselves or
Mm-hmm.
that somebody else throws our way. And you're exactly right. In my Empty Nest Full Life book, I talk about the things that empty nest moms need to let go of and the things that they need to hold on to. And one
Mm-hmm.
of the things that we need to let go of is guilt.
Mm-hmm.
And many of us have false guilt. And if a child turns out well, we can
Mm-hmm.
pat ourselves on the back. But if they don't turn out well, then we blame ourselves. And the
Mm-hmm.
reality is, there's a lot of dynamics that play out. Could we have done something different? Sure. I think every mom looks in the rearview mirror and goes, if I had to do that again, I'd
Yeah.
probably do that a little different. I think
Mm-hmm.
every one of us does. Why? Because usually when we're looking back, we have 10 years, 5 years more experience and more perspective, more wisdom. And so I like to say, though, as moms, that we need to give ourselves the grace of growth. And what I mean by that is you've grown since then. And so give yourself the grace for that. But when we let our kids define us, what's happening is we're making our kids an idol. We begin to worship that idol.
Yeah.
How they think about us, the things they say about us, their actions, like how they're doing in the world.
Yeah.
And we're not supposed to define ourselves by that. We're only
Mm-hmm.
supposed to define ourselves by what Jesus says about us. Yeah.
Yeah. And I see that I've seen it in myself and I've seen it in so many other moms. It's really why I started the podcast was
Hmm.
because I could see that moms were losing their identity to the successes and the failures of their children. Exactly what you just said. So, kiddos doing good, I must be good. Kiddos doing bad, I must be bad. And God is that is not who I created you to be. You are my daughter first. As a matter of fact, I have my daughter's first t-shirt on. I just went to a conference last week, a retreat for women to go back and revisit who are we first? Before we were
Mm,
mom, before we were wife, before we were anything that we label ourselves with, podcaster, author, speaker, daughters of the king
that's
first.
right.
Let's go back to that. One of the things that fascinates me also that you speak about and that you share is that you talk about staying marriage centered and not
Mhm.
child centered and why that is so important. And I think this would be speaking to maybe younger generations. I see it now that we are on the cusp of being empty nesters. We still have 5 years with one home. Our youngest is 14, but I've also seen where in our marriage we have cycled in and out of where we were very child centered.
Mhm.
And in a lot of situations, that was when a child was struggling. And
Yeah.
so it was all about that child, and our marriage was put on the back burner. But simultaneously, which is interesting, is in the struggle of a child, I can also see where the marriage grew more as we came together to to
To solve
handle
it
that.
or to, yeah,
Yeah.
to manage it together.
But I
Hmm.
know in a lot of situations, that's not what happens. Actually, when it becomes child centered, the partners, they have differing opinions and they pull apart. So let's unpack that a little bit. Having a marriage that is marriage centered and not child centered, because I know a lot of listeners also have young kids and they're like, marriage centered. We are in a million different directions right now with kids. We can hardly focus on ourselves. So let's unpack that just a little bit before we close
Yeah.
out.
Yeah, absolutely. I was first introduced to the concept years ago when I was a young mom. I read a book, I think it was called A Mother's Touch by Elise Arndt. And there was a chapter in there, and the title of the chapter was Wife First, Mother Second. And I'd never heard of that concept. In my mind, my kids are little. This is what our marriage is about, is taking care of our family. But her whole argument was for the marriage comes first, and someday the children leave and the marriage still needs to exist. So parenting is only one season of a marriage. See, most of us, when we're in the middle of parenting, we're not thinking of it that way. We're
Right.
thinking that this is what marriage is. But it's really, and let me tell you, as one who, our last one left home in, let's see, he got married in 2016. So we are 10 years empty nesters. I'm 61, my husband's 65. So we're still in the prime of our life. We've got a lot of life outside of
Mm-hmm.
parenting. And so she's right. We had a small window before I got pregnant when we'd been married 11 months. And
Mm-hmm.
so that came really quickly and early in our relationship. And we had kids over a almost 14-year span. So that means we were parenting for a really long time. But there's still life afterwards. And if you wait to put your marriage, if you put your marriage on the back burner and then expect that in the empty nest season, you're going to move it to the front burner, unfortunately, the flame's gone out by then. And so we don't want to do that. So that's one reason that you have to realize that parenting is only a small part of it. The marriage needs to last the whole lifetime. The second reason is that in a kid's life, mom and dad are their world. And if mom and dad are okay, their world is okay. So
Mm-hmm.
you're actually providing security for your children when you are prioritizing your marriage, when you're making sure that your marriage is healthy, that it's at the top of the priority list. Now, you may have a clingy kid that doesn't make that easy.
Yeah.
Our youngest was very much a mommy's boy. And I can remember one night when Mark and I were doing a little overnight and I was getting ready to leave, and his face is up against the window and going, "Mommy, don't weave me, don't weave
No.
me." And I'm like, "You are not making this easy, kid. You're not
No.
making this easy."
They
But I,
don't.
no, but I also realized he doesn't know what's best for him. I
Yeah.
know what's best for him. And what's best for
Mm.
him is that his daddy and I take time for each other. His daddy and I invest in this relationship that's foundational in his world right now. And so, what does it mean, though, to do marriage over minors? Some people say it that way: wife first, mother second, marriage centered, not child centered. It means that sometimes we have to be willing to leave the kids to take time for our marriage,
Mm-hmm.
and of us aren't. And that's when we become more child centered than marriage centered. Nobody can take care of our kid as well as we can. And we had one couple that came for a marriage intensive last year, and their kids, I think, are 12 and 8. And that weekend that they spent with us, so we host marriage intensives in our home. We have couples that come, and we work with one couple at a time, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. Or if they do a 4-day intensive, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday. And this couple, this was the first time they had ever left their children in 12 years.
Wow.
That's child centered, and that's not healthy. And it's part of the reason that they were at our house, that
Mm-hmm.
they were having to work through some things because there had been no investment in the marriage relationship. So it also means maybe our kids have a bedtime.
Yeah.
Like we become child centered when our kids get to lead the show. We're marriage centered when we say, no, you need to be in bed at 8 o'clock for your own health, as well as for the health of our relationship, so that we have some time before
Mm-hmm.
we need to go to bed. It doesn't mean that you have to spend a lot of time and a lot of money. It means that you need to be consistently intentional about prioritizing your marriage above your kids. And that doesn't mean that there aren't times that kids' needs are going to take some precedent. But I'm
Sure.
talking
Sure.
about when push comes to shove, the marriage comes above the kids and what's most important.
I feel, and this is me just speaking from experience and from relationships with other women, I feel like that the mom role is more to blame, I would say, for allowing the marriage to become child centered and not marriage centered.
I would agree with you, although I would say there is a small percentage of men out there. We've just had enough experience working with couples to know that there have been, and there are some occasional ones that happen where the man is more child-centered than the woman is, but I would
Hmm.
agree with you. I would say that
Hmm.
probably 95% of the time it's the woman. Everything wraps around we're often our identity is wrapped around our mothering,
Hmm.
and certainly we are in charge of home and family. And it's easy to look at our spouse. We look at our kids and go, you can't dress yourself. You can't feed yourself. And you look at your spouse and go, hey, you can dress yourself and feed yourself. Deal with it.
Yeah.
It's just, we get into
Hmm.
that kind of a mindset, and it's a dangerous one, not one that is going to be helpful for the family in the long haul.
Scott and I've had plenty of discussions because I don't particularly care to leave the kids, especially with having six and as leaving that many children to go do anything.
It's a
It's like,
logistic nightmare.
it is. This is a lot of work to get me out the door.
Yep.
It's still a lot of work. And five of the six, well, six of the six can take care of themselves. A 14-year-old is so very independent, being the sixth child. I can run this household. I've got this. But even then, getting me out the house last week, like I said, I went to a retreat. And after the first session where I had put my phone up, when I looked at my phone, I was like, oh my word, people, you're not going to fall apart if you can't reach mom, even my husband, even Scott. And I was like, y'all are okay without me for 2 hours. It's impressive. And so, anyway, but so Scott and I have talked about how, and so often it makes him feel like the leader of the home. It makes him, in his words, feel more manly when I do put him first and I don't put the
Yes.
kids first. It doesn't require a lot. That's what's so crazy is he doesn't require a week of my attention, but if I say kids are going to bed or I got a babysitter and we're going out to dinner or whatever and I
Yep.
put him first, that can fuel his soul for a minute. It really
Oh
can.
my gosh.
To know you are
Absolutely.
still number 1. You are still number 1.
Yes. Yes. And because he needs to be number one even after the kids leave.
Yeah.
It's not, oh, you get to be number two for the 25 years that we're raising our children or however long it is for each person. And then you get to move to number one.
Yeah.
No. And then here's the other thing, Courtney. What kind of a message is that sending to our kids for their marriages?
Right. Right.
Right? We want them to see us prioritize the marriage relationship because A, it tells them, hey, you don't just have a good marriage, you have to create a good marriage to
Mm.
be intentional. And B, it's the way that you keep a good marriage is that you keep the marriage relationship a priority. And that takes time. And it may mean going away, and it may mean getting a babysitter. And so you're a role model for your kids' marriage in the future.
Yeah, 100%. I
Yeah.
close every episode with something that maybe you're praying for and a verse that you could share with the listeners.
Something that I'm praying for, I would say right now, Mark and I are praying about a new book and a new marriage book. We were just talking about it this morning when we were having breakfast together, just praying about the right timing and what does that look like and what would be in it. So that would be probably one of the things that I'm praying for. Bible verse that is huge to me is one that I use personally, and it's one that we spend a lot of time on with those that we coach. And that is Romans 8, 5, and 6. And that verse says, for those who live according to the flesh, they set their minds on the things of the flesh. And those who live according to the Spirit, they set their minds on the things of the Spirit. For to set the mind on the flesh is death,
Mm.
but to set the mind on the Spirit is life and peace. And I've really come to understand that where I put my mind
Hmm.
is going to give me some predictable results. And it's either going to be the flesh, which is going to be often emotion led. It's going to be lies of the enemy. It's
Hmm.
what I feel like, what I want. That's going to bring about death. But the spirit, which is going to be truth, which is going to be maybe decision based instead of emotion based, and it's going to be what God wants, that's going to bring me life and peace. And I have seen it play out over and over again in my life personally. I think it's a powerful verse.
I have one final question that I was thinking of as you were saying that. What has been the most surprising thing that God has done in this relationship with you and Mark?
That is a great question. I think we have the marriage that I felt like we had, but now I can see that we didn't, but that he dreamed of.
Mm,
So I would say that it's the friendship, the vulnerability in the relationship. And so the depth of our relationship and the depth of our healing, we're not triggered by anything that's happened in the past. And
mm,
so I am so grateful for that. But the other thing that came to my mind, Courtney, is that we also have a ministry to marriages, not only here in the US, but in Africa.
mm.
And that's been very surprising to both of us. We first went there in 2023 and we had 1,200 people attend our marriage conference. Many of them
Wow.
walked 3 days to get there. We went back in 2025. We had over 1,200 that time. We went back in 2026. We had the same amount. We went to a different place, different church, had almost 1,200 as well. And both of us pinch ourselves and go, oh my goodness, can you even believe this? Like, this, we didn't even dream this. This wasn't
Right.
even on the vision. And not only that, but one of the biggest challenges in Africa is infidelity, Courtney.
Really?
It's one of the biggest challenges.
And there
Yeah.
God has placed y'all.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Our story is a perfect fit for that. And oh, yeah, that's definitely surprised me.
Wow.
Isn't that just the way
Such,
God works?
yeah, absolutely. Such encouragement and hope. And I appreciate the time that you've spent sharing with us. And I look forward to the listeners hearing from you.
Oh, thank you so much for inviting me.
Thanks, Jill. Thanks so much for listening to The Mom Show with Courtney Doyle. Remember to check the show notes for any links, books, or resources that are mentioned in each episode. We want to be sure this blesses other mothers. And in order to do this, if you're listening via podcast, be sure that you like and share. If you could write a review, that would be fantastic. It helps us get in front of other moms. If you're watching via YouTube, be sure to hit that subscribe button. This way, you won't ever miss an episode. We want to make sure that we increase our reach to other mothers who need a little encouragement, a community, and a whole lot of Jesus. We're so glad you're here.